Hello Internet, and welcome to my live reaction for Fire Force Chapter 297. When we last left our heroes, Shinra Sho and Mari had combined to form Shinra Bansho Man, this sort of, figure of hope that could easily counteract all the despair Haumea could throw at him, which forced Haumea to kind of, while still attacking Shinra Bansho Man, or really just Shinra in particular, with pure weaponized despair, she also had to kind of argue her case for despair. You know, going back to those more seemingly kind arguments that this is what humanity has always wanted, so who are you to sort of push back against it? And Shinra then pushes back against her claims, pointing out, things like, things I hadn't really thought of as counter-arguments, like just how much fun you could tell Arthur and Captain Benimaru were having, just living life, the concept of hysterical strength, that if the unconscious truly pointed to death, then the fear of death would not activate that kind of increased strength. So plenty of interesting points. Haumea was having none of it though, and I think combined with all of the souls of the people who have died, I think, to become this giant three-eyed titan of despair, which is definitely something. I don't quite know what to make of that just yet, but it's definitely something. So let's just dive right on into chapter 297. And we open with the souls that were in Haumea's tears. Mankind's unconscious, becoming one with the evangelist. The saint cries, shedding as many tears as there are creatures born on this planet. And we see, the three eyes, each of them crying. In order to compete with Shinra Bansho Man, Haumea becomes a despair saint. Not quite sure what exactly a despair saint is and how that's different from what she already was. But anyway, we have our scan later page, our go by the manga page. And we cut to Shinra looking down at the new giant Haumea. You're not looking too bright there, despair saint. And we just see Haumea, who, despite being kind of a giant now, is still below where Shinra is, just crying at him. Shinra Bansho Man's here, so quit crying already. And that's kind of going back to what Shinra had said last chapter, as long as there are tears, Shinra Bansho Man will be there. And Haumea responds, "Let us perish together, Shinra Bansho Man." And then with that, she just at this point, not doing any of that light of despair stuff. She is throwing the black flames of Adolla straight at Shinra. And Haumea tells him, "Embrace these black flames. They offer you your salvation." But Shinra does not. He just kind of deflects them all, easy peasy, and turns them into flowers. Which I'm hoping that's a sign we might see Iris again. I still think Iris' death is kind of one of the worst moments in Fire Force. So maybe we'll get to see that rectified, and hopefully these flowers, quack theory I know, might be a symbol of that getting rectified. Anyway, Sho looks at that kind of shocked. "Brother, those sparks." And we look at the flowers again. I'm not sure what sparks Sho is talking about, but Shinra seems to know what he's saying. Yeah. And Haumea is just shocked. "What are you turning these flames that I've waited for so long into? How dare you?" Oh, maybe I'm not quite sure what those sparks line refers to, but maybe part of it is turning this symbol of despair and death into life and hope represented by flowers. Maybe that's what that's almost certainly what Haumea is taking that as, because she is livid. "How dare you!" And she throws more and more black flames at Shinra. Shinra just flies up and runs through them, turning them all into flowers behind him. Haumea almost seems to have no chance here. But Haumea still presses on, once again resisting in vain. And Shinra goes in for an attack. "Shinra Bansho, kick!" And he slams right into Haumea. Or actually maybe ends up kicking behind her. Either Haumea dodged, or he aimed for the ground behind her, maybe. Also, it seems I vastly misinterpreted Haumea's size last chapter. The way last chapter's cliffhanger sort of framed her, she looked like this sort of behemoth. But now that we see Shinra and Haumea right next to each other, they look roughly the same height. So either Shinra's also a giant now, or I kind of misinterpreted that. Anyway, the flowers from Shinra's kick sort of expands, covering the ground where Haumea is. And there's just sort of this whoosh as the fire sort of fades away. Haumea is like begging, please stop this. Those black flames are dear to me. But Shinra just kind of ignores her and stomps his feet down again, covering the field of flowers even higher. I'm curious if this will end up maybe being the climactic moment. I had sort of theorized last week that Haumea's new form would lead to one last full on, the sort of tactile fight that Fire Force does so well. And maybe I was wrong. Maybe it's just another avenue for their big philosophical debate to end the series. And I'm going to talk a little bit also about the end of the series at the end of this video, given that Okubo just recently made an announcement about that that I'll go into in a bit. But anyway, so yeah, we have the field of flowers just continuing to expand, and Haumea just begs, please stop this already! Please! No more sorrow! And Shinra counters, take another look. Pretty, isn't it? So yeah, we're seeing, Shinra sort of making the same arguments he's been making this whole time, that that hope isn't horrific in the way that Haumea sees it. It's beautiful. Here, symbolized by Shinra literally turning the flames of despair of Adolla into the sort of flower of hope. Anyway, Haumea goes on, a light such as this can only be found in a life outside the chain of despair. Do you plan to connect me to such a life? Wait, what's that about? That line there can only be found in a life outside the chain of despair. Do you plan to connect me to such a life? I'm trying to work out what exactly she's getting at there. Because, the kind of sense I had from her, especially last chapter, was that, Shinra's hope is a nice thought. But the fact of the matter is that despair is reality, and to deny that, to deny the death that frees people from despair, is cruelty. But, it would be nice to have that hope. I think that's how I'm kind of interpreting her I wish I was still a human line. But the way this seems to be framed, it seems that, I don't know, she thinks that, or she's angry that Shinra could find her a life outside of despair. I don't know, it's kind of weird. Anyway, Shinra sort of ignores her and thinks, let's see. What did that thing I saw at Vulcan's workshop look like? I think it was something like, it's the world of animals that we haven't really gone back to in 250 chapters. And yeah, he forms a giant whale out of the flames. It's kind of like kawaii whale, but it jumps out of the flowers, or maybe out of water that Shinra's created. Is Shinra... Okay, so I've been very anti Fire Force as a Soul Eater prequel. I think that's just kind of boring, and it stops Fire Force from being its own thing with a few callbacks to Soul Eater, and instead sort of makes it the sort of thing that to fully understand you have to have already read Soul Eater. And I have started Soul Eater. I'm 14 chapters in. But I think that Fire Force should be allowed to stand on its own and not in the end loop back to Soul Eater again. But also I can kind of see this. They're in this garden. The only two people alive. And, the series has never really been shy about its Catholic imagery. I can almost see them as a Garden of Eden here. And the Garden of Eden, of course, is the start of the world, so maybe this is, unfortunately, the start of the Soul Eater world. I sure hope not, but we'll see. I do think the Garden of Eden, though, is at least somewhat intended. Anyway, the whale then splashes back below the surface, and Haumea is just tearing. Weeping. And Shinra's kind of, blushing. Wow, a whale! Then he sort of says it more seriously, brother, that whale just now, isn't that a bit too comical? Yeah, it was kind of kawaii, I'll say. And Shinra sort of comments, hey, come on. I can't remember exactly what it looked like. But it seems like all of Shinra's attempts to break through to Haumea have maybe failed. Shinra Bansho Man, you are a devil that continues to create sorrow. Before this wretched stain spreads any further. And interestingly enough, she kind of transforms again. Her two normal eyes kind of extend downwards in a way reminiscent of this chapter's first page. Let me go back to page 1 real quick. The sort of 3 vertical eyes. But also the way her face is bent looks kind of Yona-esque. And Yona's one of those characters we saw a lot at the beginning and then kind of never touched on again. Or like not never touched on again, but was sort of brought up every now and then. And it felt like there was more to him than what we saw, but we never did. And now we have Haumea, as she transforms, morphing into Yona. Crack theory that I doubt would be confirmed even if it is true. What if Yona was the first Cataclysm saint? What if Yona filled the role Haumea did in this Cataclysm in the first Cataclysm, and became the kind of morphed figure we've seen him as? But, that Cataclysm failed, and so that role was passed on to Haumea. I don't know. A bit of a crack theory, I admit, but maybe there's something to that. Anyway. Haumea declares, before this wretched stain spreads any further, I must, and she shoots a beam, I guess once again of despair, at Shinra, return you to the flames myself. And it just comes straight for Shinra. Shinra just does not seem concerned. Sho is, though. Brother, watch out! That's a divine light that'll destroy anything it hits! You can't survive such a thing! No living being could! But Shinra does. He literally just grabs the beam, grabs the light, like it's nothing. Shocking Sho, he sort of holds on to it and thinks, what amazing energy. And he just throws it up into the air. And we see this flash, this explosion, and fire, it seems, rains down. Oh, no. So that fire comes up, and that's not fire, those are clouds. It's like terraforming, almost. As Sho looks up in shock, he created an atmosphere, and we see clouds coming in, and rain starts to fall. Lightly covering Haumea, but just pouring over Shinra. And Arthur, up in space, who's again regained his limbs somehow, looks down. The black flames are being extinguished. And Haumea just watches him. She's kind of back to normal. She's lost the sort of eye thing. And Shinra looks at her. Let's shed some tears in the rain. Despair, Saint. The overwhelming power of hope wipes off the tears of despair. To be continued, chapter 298, It's God. Okay, so before I start going into the looking back at the whole chapter, let's talk about what Okubo said. Because what he said was, there was an ANN article that had this, I guess, results of an interview, where he said that I'm going to pull up the actual interview to quick read through it as fast as I can if I can find it again. Okay, so the title is, Fire Force manga ends in a few chapters, about 2 volumes. He also said, Okubo said that he has 2 chapters left to draw. I'm assuming the rest have been already finished and sent to the editor or whatever. Will end in about 2 volumes. So the about there is a direct quote, apparently. But if that's true, if it ends in the 34th volume, because 32 is the latest volume, right? That's released in Japan. That ends with looking at this chapter list. The moment when Shinra and Sho go into the eye dome or whatever. There's about 9 chapters. There is, it seems, 9 chapters per volume, just about every single time, which would mean there would be 18 chapters after that, ending the series at around 304-ish, which means they have about 7 chapters left, and that feels mostly right. I could see the series. I could easily see the series wrapping up in 7 chapters. I for a while was saying maybe it'll end at 300 even, and we're reaching the point I'm kind of doubtful of that, even without what Okubo said in that article the other day. But yeah, we have about 7 chapters left. So let's talk about this chapter. Because there's a lot here. I really liked it. I like the sort of imagery of, Haumea has been going on and on about despair, and Shinra just creates symbols of hope out of the despair. Literally changing despair into hope, which is kind of what he's a symbol of. The world at this point is encased in despair, and he is fighting it. And it also kind of fits his motif of the savior. You can make an argument that the world was couched in sin and despair, and in Christian belief, Christ came down from the heavens and purged the faithful from sin, or purged them of sin, and gave them hope. And it fits with. I love the idea also of the black flames that has kind of killed everyone, becoming the symbol of life in the flowers. I think this is a really neat thing. It also fits into the garden imagery, which if this is not meant to be a Soul Eater prequel, if this is not set up for Shinra creating the Soul Eater world, and it's just sort of, fitting in with all the Catholic imagery and Shinra recreating the world, I do like it a lot. I really do like, the image of the Garden of Eden being what Shinra's created this garden filled with new life, from which it doesn't quite fit the actual Christian creation story, as the Garden of Eden comes after the world is created, but the concept of the Garden of Eden as the beginning of mankind still fits really well here. I love the imagery Okubo is pulling from here, and I don't know, I just love that toothpaste spread of the whale. I can't stop looking at it. This is really nice. And then we have the atmosphere. I hope Shinra can bring everyone back to life. At least everyone post Obi's death at bare minimum come back to life. I would like to see Obi come back to life too, to be quite honest. But at least bring everyone who was consumed in the fires back. And not just say they all died and then Soul Eater happened. That would just be my absolute least favorite ending to Fire Force, physically possible. I just really hate that ending. If it's just everyone dies and then an older cast that people have already gained attachments to just comes in to replace them. I really, really hate that ending, I think. Not to beat a dead horse at this point, because I think it's very clear at this point. I really, really don't like that ending as a concept. But anyway, let's see how it plays out. I will say, the one thing I am kind of interested in is that I have thought that Shinra and Haumea and Sho and Mari were all in, another plane. I guess I have thought, for some reason I was operating on the assumption that Adolla and Earth were still kind of separate, and that Shinra's actions here weren't actually happening on Earth. But also, given the whole point of the Cataclysm is Adolla and the Earth becoming one, it does make sense that Shinra's actions are affecting the former Earth we see from space. Anyway, there's a whole lot here. We have that title, It's God, which feels like next chapter might be a climax. Also, the Wikipedia article that has a list of Fire Force chapters I was using earlier to calculate how long we had left in the manga, translates the next chapter as Dear Lord, which is interesting. That translation also feels a bit more religious, if that's kind of what Okubo is going for, but I don't know enough about the intricacies of translation, yada yada yada, all the stuff I've said over and over again throughout all my videos. I don't know shit about the Japanese language, so I don't know who's right there and who's wrong. Anyway, my final point being, there's just a lot of fun here. And it's nice, we had a long, long stretch of despair seeming to win out. And it's nice to finally, this was also true last week, but it's nice to see hope just kind of reign supreme. None of Haumea's despair is really working anymore. The one problem is that, if despair truly has no effect on Shinra, The finale has the risk of, or runs the risk of being an anticlimax, but we'll have to see how Okubo makes all this play out as it goes on. I'm still hoping that it'll all work out incredibly to match this. How good Fire Force has been for so long. I just can't wait to see. I just want to see how it ends. I'm so excited to see how it ends in the best way possible. I don't know. I'm just here for a good time, and I can't wait to see how it all plays out. So I'm going to leave this video off here. Hope you'll enjoy the chapter and the video itself. If you did, feel free to drop me a like or subscribe. Do whatever makes you happy, And as always, your life is your own, okay? Bye!